I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Wednesday, July 31st. What an amazing week, 10 days it's been. A lot has happened for the nation and the world, and we want to get into some of the things we've been watching, following through this week. First of all, let me thank you for joining, checking us out, and ask you to support this program by sending a text out or a tweet out or sending a Facebook post out to your friends, your networks, asking them to check us out here at the Conversation with Al McFarlane. They can go to any of those platforms or come to our platform at YouTube, Insight News MN. And we'd love to invite everybody to both subscribe, like, and share. We've crossed the threshold. Our initial target was 1,000 subscribers. We're heading to 2,000, and you can be part of that. We depend on you. We ask you to be a subscriber and let people know in your network. And we'd love to have you participating in the program as well. How do you do that? Well, if you got a comment, a reaction, a question, drop it in the comment section. We'll get it. We'll read it. We'll shout you out. You can shout out yourself, your neighborhood, your town, your community. We want to have that kind of engagement here. Pleased to have on today's program my friend Antonio Rossell. And Antonio is involved in the civic life of our community here in Minnesota, but he's an international person as well. I think I met Antonio a few years back when he was working with Pastors for Peace, organizing and supporting and participating in caravans for peace to Cuba. And we've talked about that work of engagement from that time on. It's always a joy to have Antonio here in the program. Antonio, good afternoon. Welcome again, my friend.
Good afternoon, Al, and good afternoon to our viewers. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today. It's always a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity.
Well, let me say this, Antonio, for somebody who's in Minnesota who's viewing, we'd like to have you sort of let us know that you're viewing and put a question or make a comment on our conversation today. But we're going to ask you to do this before your comment. Say put the word baseball in, and then make your comment. Right? Why? Well, we're going to select a couple of people who make comments like that. A pair of tickets to a Minnesota Twins baseball game. So if you're a Twins baseball game, we've got some tickets for August games here in Minnesota. We'd love to have you be at a Twins game as our guest. And that's all you got to do is make a comment on the topic or any topic, but make the first word baseball, and we'll find you and we'll try to make sure that you get a pair of tickets to go to the game. Well, our 2A game. Antonio, what's on your mind, first of all? What kind of things that are top of mind with you? I've got several that I want to talk about as well, but we can kind of go back and forth and explore current issues.
Well, thanks for that, Al. It's been a momentous week. It's been a momentous several weeks. It's been a momentous set of months. I feel so. I am somebody who watches and follows events and news kind of with a little bit of detail and a lot of attention, and I've done so for many years, particularly international events, geopolitical events, changes that are occurring in our world. And I have to say that I can't remember a time when so much has been happening so quickly in so many places at once, in terms of war, in terms of peace, in terms of economic rearrangement, in terms of political rearrangements within countries and in different regions in the world, and with a lot of moment, a lot of impact to them. And I think this last week is a very important week as well, and kind of highlights that. Here are some of the topics that I think are important to follow. Recently, just 2 days ago, well, I'm going to say that the event from today, the assassination of the leader of Hamas political the political branch of Hamas, the peace negotiator who was the chief of this branch, of the political branch of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, targeted by an Israeli airstrike. And so the person who was negotiating for a peace agreement, a ceasefire agreement with Israel, was assassinated earlier today, not in Gaza, not in another place, but in Iran. So in the sovereign location of another country, where he was actually a guest for the inauguration of the new Iranian president, who was just elected because the previous Iranian president was killed in a still mysterious helicopter crash about 2 months ago.
Mhm.
And this is, so in a way, this is a move that can trigger, and it's an escalatory move, meaning it has been done with the intent to escalate tensions, to have Iran respond in a way that potentially then will involve a U.S. response against Iran. Right now, there are multiple ships from the United States and Britain steaming towards the areas around Iran and around the Mediterranean, to be ready to, in a way, stop any response from Iran that could affect Israel. So that's something that just happened today, and is tremendously important. And it's, of course, all within this escalation. And really, I think we need not be shy about this ongoing genocidal actions against the Palestinian peoples. Now 40,000 civilians killed in the last 10 months, upwards of 200,000 civilians estimated to be killed, according to the Lancet Medical Journal. And this is the direct bombings that have been occurring. It's also starvation from the lack of access to food, which we as a nation have had a hand in defunding the United Nations Agency for Refugees. It's on top of an incredible rise in infectious disease, including polio, in Gaza, because of the wholesale destruction of the medical facilities in Gaza by the Israeli government and military. And astoundingly, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a presentation to the US Congress just last week. He received 55 standing ovations for a 50-minute speech. It's the highest number of standing ovations that anyone in the whole history of the US Congress has received. So, that's one thing. And now I've talked about a couple of things. Now here, let's also mention Venezuela. And Venezuela is a country that I think for most people in the United States, it's far away. We don't really know about it. It's communist or something. Well, it's a country that is a democracy and is a capitalist country, but that it has a very strong sense of its sovereignty. And every time there is an election, there is unrest that gets kind of supported or fomented from the outside. Why is that? Venezuela has the highest proven reserves of petroleum of any country in the world. I'm including Saudi Arabia, I'm including Iran, Iraq, the Middle East. The highest, the most petroleum in the world exists in Venezuela. And since Hugo Chavez, who was president of Venezuela and got elected, I think it was 1998 or so on, ever since, the loss of access to that resource has led to the wholesale theft and blockade of the country in a way that just recently a study came out. The impact of the United States blockade is comparable to 3 times the Great Depression's effect in the United States back in the 30s. And that's what we have helped to facilitate. Now, one last topic that I think, just out of many, but one last item that I think is really interesting to discuss. is to continue maybe thinking a little bit about the attempted assassination of a former president and now candidate Donald Trump. Incredible lapses in the security that he was offered. And part of what's interesting about the event, I mean, there are many angles, of course. It was to be 2 days. It happened 2 days before the Republican convention, which would have thrown that whole process of them figuring out who their candidate is in total disarray. Total disarray. It had this event had the most press, CNN and other chains available and visible there to record for posterity what occurred there. And interestingly, of course, there's, we can go back to, I think it was June 27th when this debate between President Biden and former President Trump took place, where it was really difficult to hide the deterioration of current President Biden. Now, within 1 week of this attempted assassination of candidate Trump, former President Trump, failing, is when the Democratic leadership decides, actually, we're going to lose if we present Biden and Trump remains as candidate. And so within a week, President Biden decides that he no longer will be running as candidate for the presidency and elevates immediately Vice President Kamala Harris as now the nominee. And so it's, if one looks at all these situations, even without access to facts, but just with access to logic, one says, these are all very interesting things that should be discussed in a more open and, in a way, less partisan way.
Well, let me ask you, what is your, without being conspiratorial, your sense of the connection between the assassination attempt and its failure, number one, but also the rapid progression of changes following it, from President Biden making his decision, elevating of Kamala Harris, the selection of, had JD been chosen already when the assassination? No. So all of that's happened in a really compressed time. What's the connection from your point of view?
Well, so one of the things that I like when looking at events that occur that are momentous is not so much to try to have an answer as to what caused with which thing, but simply to notice. And that's one of, as people living in the United States who are, we are subjected to information that has specific purposes. And I can talk about those purposes in a little bit as well. I mean, I could say broadly, they are to support and increase polarization, and to conduct to what people call sometimes a strategy of tension, which is to increase antagonism so that we find it almost impossible to talk to each other. And so what I like to do is just to simply notice what things seem unusual, or seem less than logical, or seem something that doesn't make all that much sense. So in this specific situation with the assassination attempt, and so former President Trump, candidate Trump, had not yet announced his vice president, and in a way, had he been killed in that attempt, that whole convention would have been in disarray. Who would have been the presidential candidate? Nobody would know that J.D. Vance was going to be a vice president, President Trump's
running mate
choice for VP. And could he have come up on his own? I don't know. I don't know these things. But it's just or
could it have been the Speaker of the House or someone else in the leadership of the Republican Party? Well, you know what? President Trump is right now addressing the National Association of Black Journalists at their convention in Chicago. Let's drop in on that. I think we've got a feed from one of the national networks. Let's listen a little bit. And the controversy is that some are questioning three things. One, why is that organization of Black journalists who primarily work for white organizations, why are they creating a platform for what they seem to agree will be an opportunity for disinformation, for lying, and for gaslighting by the president? That's what he's been doing. Why should he be afforded that? And does that support his idea to peel away or what's the right word for it? Create disconnection from voting in the Black community, voter disenfranchisement. Is this a part of that strategy? And so there are protests going on outside. Another reason some people are criticizing it is that this is a panel of three women journalists, and they wonder why isn't there a male, the gender balance. And then the last thing is that one of the journalists is Harris Faulkner, I think her name is, who's a Fox 9 anchor and has been kind of one of the mainstays in the conservative information system. Let's check. He's speaking right now. We'll drop in and we'll comment.
She made a turn and she became a Black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe
I
that
think
she is
somebody should look into that too when you ask continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some
I
Republicans
really
have
don't
said?
know. I mean, I really don't know. Could be. There are some, and there are plenty. I know this lady right over there, Harris, is a fantastic person who just interviewed me at length. And we had a great interview, I think, and I heard you got very good ratings on that.
Well, you told me it was the longest one of your life, so we had a good discussion. Look, I want to talk about why you're here today. I mean, it is not lost on us how divided we are as a country. And as you were coming today, we really got to see that we are divided along the lines of race, along the lines of gender. And there is this question of, in this moment where we are, why come here? What is your message today?
My message is to stop people from invading our country that are taking, frankly, a lot of problems with it. But one of the big problems, and a lot of the journalists in this room I know and I have great respect for, a lot of the journalists in this room are Black. I will tell you that coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking Black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a Black job, sir?
A Black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
And
Mr. President,
they're taking the employment away from Black people. They're coming in, they're invading. It's an invasion of millions of people, probably 15, 16, 17 million people. I have a feeling it's much more than that. And everybody's been seeing what's happened. The first group of people, the Black population, is affected most by that. And Kamala is allowing it to happen. She's the border czar. She's the worst border czar in the history of the world. There's never been a border czar like this. She's never even essentially been. She said she was there once, but not the right part of the border. So she was a border czar. She's done a horrible job. These people are coming into our country and they're taking Black jobs and Hispanic jobs. And frankly, they're taking union jobs. Unions are being very badly affected by all of the millions of people that are pouring into our country. And one thing, as we discussed, many of these people are coming in from mental institutions, from prisons, from jails. They're gang members in other countries. Other countries are setting loose their prisoners. They're opening up their prisons and their mental institutions, and they're taking their bad people, drug dealers, gang members, and they're bringing them into the United States. And by the way, their crime rate is going down, and our crime rate is going to be a disaster.
Mr. President?
Let's jump in right here. Antonio, what do you think? He's a piece of work.
Well,
what are your thoughts?
It's interesting to listen, to particularly the issues around immigration, which is what he is talking about. And I think it's a concern that I think it is shared among a lot of working class people. So we have X amount of jobs and X amount of workers, and if more workers come in and the number of jobs don't
It's not growing.
increase,
Mhm.
well, doesn't that make it so that we have to compete more to get for the same jobs? Doesn't it mean that we have to accept lower wages than we would otherwise? And so I think it's and I should say this: I'm an immigrant who came to the United States illegally, many years ago, and was able to get an amnesty in 1989, which was the last time that an amnesty has. Um, and I know many people who are immigrants. And actually, that I lived for a long time along Lake Street, and had many good friends who at the time were undocumented or illegal immigrants as well. And people come here to work, and they come here to try to do good things, but they do work for low pay and little pay. And does it affect jobs? I believe it does. And it's simply, it's like that question of supply and demand, right? If your supply of workers increases, what is that going to do to the salaries or the payments that are required to have workers? What do you think about that, Al?
Well, I think that the country is built on immigration. Immigration has been the engine of growth for the country. And my sense is that that analysis fuels a resistance or skepticism about the value of letting immigrants in. And that analysis is presented when the immigrants are not white. Trump himself, I think, spoke about increasing immigration from Northern Europe. So the issue is not a question of immigration, it's a question of who's immigrating. And there are the nationalists, white Christian nationalists, who believe that this country was made for, ordained by manifest destiny, driven to be an expansion of white supremacist thought and experience. And so Trump, to my knowledge, is not criticizing immigration from Europe and is promoting it, supporting it. He's also suggesting that immigration from Europe is by and large legal and done properly, by contrast to the immigration that comes from the South in particular. But the immigration that comes from the South, from my point of view, is consistent with our historic and philosophical position of welcoming the poor, the downtrodden, the disenfranchised to start anew in the American democracy experience. So it's not different from my point of view, Antonio, from the brilliance of the idea of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but the contradiction that those men who established this vision of equality were actually men who owned other human beings. They were enslavers. And so there's a capacity to withstand contradiction that disserves our common humanity. Open the border up and let's have a conversation about refiguring what economy is and what growth is and what economic relationships ought to be, not only with an expanding and growing workforce, but it also becomes an expanding and growing consumer base. But it also means there can be and should be different relationships between our economy and the families back home. Back home for me might be Jamaica, might be Cuba. For you, might be what Peru. For others, might be Brazil. It might be Taiwan, China. But the more people stay connected to where they come from as they come here and engage in economy, and if there are systems that allow these economic activities to not be held hostage to or restrained or constrained by narrowly constructed capitalist financial interest, then a new set of economic principles can emerge that really approach balance in the world, on the planet. That's what I think. So I don't want to be locked into an American vision of American dominance, an American capitalist dominance of the world. That's kind of the citadel that I think white nationalists are defending. I think it's dead and deserves to go. So I say open the border up and let them in.
Can I have a response, Al, as well? Something that you said, which I think is very true, but in a way also only partially true, is you said this country was built on immigration. And I would say, yes, that's true. But there's a huge part of it that says this country was built on slavery.
Exactly.
And there is a place where the role of a large, or let's say a huge number of immigrants entering a country, slavery is no longer legal, of course, but the ability to lower payments to workers as much as possible is something that is beneficial to the ownership class, the ones that have access to the guide capital. And so I think that it's really important. And I am somebody who is a defender of human rights, as I know that you are, and as I know that our audience members are. But in a way, we create conditions within the country that allow for a race to the bottom in terms of salaries and payments that actually deprive a lot of people who were born in this country and suffered through the formation of this country. It takes away opportunity for them to do jobs that would be beneficial to them. That's one thing, and I think that's an idea that we need to explore because so the role that immigration plays in lowering, especially entry-level salaries for entry-level jobs, or jobs that for example, if you look at in the Twin Cities, roofing, for example, it's mostly immigrants that are doing it, dangerous, without any safety hazards or protocols in place, working super long hours in terrible conditions. They're mostly new immigrants, and even if you wanted to look for a roofing company that had workers that had papers or that were from traditional communities in the U.S. And traditional, I mean, yes, white, but yes, African American, yes, longtime residents. It's harder because you can't compete. It's not possible to compete with roofing companies that are not spending money on safety equipment, that are not paying their workers, that are simply, and I've seen it. I've seen it. So that's one thing. The other, which is a really important part of this influx at the border, nobody likes leaving their country. No one likes leaving their family behind. No one likes leaving their culture behind. No one likes leaving their foods, their language. But people do it out of desperation. And that desperation is something that we as a nation are responsible for. There are one of the largest groups of immigrants into the United States nowadays is Venezuelans. And why are they leaving Venezuela? Because of our multi-year, multi-decade effort to crash their economy and to destroy their country so that we can take it over. Many people are from Cuba. Why are they coming? We got 6 decades of an economic blockade. Why are people coming from Central America? I'm old enough to remember Ronald Reagan and the wars in Central America, against Nicaragua, against Salvador, the role of Honduras, Guatemala. So I think that it's really important to disentangle those components, because it is not, the democratic. Go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing that I want to say is that there should not be the presumption that what exists right now is okay. It is not. And so the presumption that new people coming from the South or from immigration points or systems, might destabilize the existing structure. That's true. But are we worried about the comfort of the existing system, which really, despite the progress we've made, still is unfair to workers, to labor, and still advantages the ownership class? And the question is, how do we change our base core system, the arrangement of understanding about what it means to be human and the capacity of a society to engage, support, nurture every human being in that system, valuing that person where she or he is as a human being and as a valuable person. Listen, let's go back to the conference and listen some more and come back and
Yes.
keep talking. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with my friend Antonio Rossell, and we're both talking and monitoring the presentation, the interview of former President Donald Trump. He's being interviewed by a panel at the National Association of Black Journalists annual convention going on right now in Chicago, Illinois. Let's listen in.
I mean, you take a look at, his career has been an amazing career. He started off at a level with a difficult family situation, very difficult with the mother and the father and everything else. He ends up going to Yale Law School and was one of the top students, became the head of the Law Journal. I mean, that's an amazing thing. He's a 4-year, he was in the military with great distinction for 4 years, got out, went into business, became successful in business, very successful in business, actually, did public offerings and other things. And I have to believe in that. I mean, he's somebody that was born in a rough situation. Most of the people know that situation because it was very well documented in his book. And I have a lot of respect for somebody that can get into Yale and become one of the best students in Yale, that meets a young woman at Yale who was also outstanding, and they get married, they have a beautiful family. But he had he's made himself an amazing life. He then goes to Ohio, lives in Ohio, and he had my endorsement. That helped. But he wins the Senate. He becomes a United States Senator. So he's a United States Senator. And so, Harris, like I respect you for your success, I respect people for their success.
The reason I asked the question is because the last time you and I sat and talked was the day that you were shot. We'd been together for much of that day. You left to go to Butler, Pennsylvania, and we didn't know what was next.
Yeah.
And 2 days after that,
I cannot understand your microphone.
I know it is really hard for me to understand.
It's just I can understand you perfectly.
Because she's closer.
I can understand you,
Happy to hear that, sir.
but I can't
Really happy to hear
understand,
that.
Harris.
I have a few more questions.
Because of the distance, and the mics are really in lousy shape, but I cannot understand
So,
what you're saying.
so what I wanted to say was the last time we spoke, you said some words that were prophetic because I asked you who you wanted to choose for vice president.
Yeah.
And you said normally it really wouldn't matter what they would bring, you choose somebody that you think has a future, that sort of thing. But you said these words 3.5 hours before an attempted assassination on your life. You told me that bad things happen, Harris, and that's why this decision is important this time. Bad things happen. You said it twice. When you look at J.D. Vance, is he ready on day one?
Does he what?
Ready on day one, if he has to be.
I've always had great respect for him, and for the other candidates too. But I will say this, and I think this is well documented. Historically, the vice president, in terms of the election, does not have any impact. I mean, virtually no impact. You have 2 or 3 days where there's a lot of commotion as to who, like you're having it on the Democrat side, who it's going to be. And then that dies down, and it's all about the presidential pick. Virtually never has it mattered. Maybe Lyndon Johnson mattered for different reasons of what we're talking about, not for vote reasons, but for political reasons, other political reasons. But historically, the choice of a vice president makes no difference. You're voting for the president, and you can have a vice president who's outstanding in every way, and I think JD is. I think that all of them would have been. but you're not voting that way. You're voting for the president. You're voting for me. If you like me, I'm going to win. If you don't like me, I'm not going to win.
I'm going to get my JD Vance question in.
JD Vance?
I'm going to get my JD Vance question in. To your point and to Rachel's point, he, has a lot of opinions about childless women like myself or divorced people like yourself. Do you think, well, I mean, my point
but at
is
least
here.
it was said in a friendly manner.
My point is, do you think the Republican Party is getting a little bit too judgy about people's lives when you think about abortion or when you think about what JD Vance is saying?
I don't think, look, I think that the Democrat Party is really the one that has the problem. I think they're radical on abortion because they're allowing abortion in the 9th month. They're allowing the
But
death.
I think it's
They're
about
allowing
freedom,
the
right?
death of a baby after the baby is born, based on
Sir,
the
that is
governor of
illegal in
Virginia.
every state in the
That's
country.
Based on the governor of Virginia,
Executing a
they're
baby in
allowing the
every
death
state
of
in
the
the country
baby
is illegal.
after it's born.
It's a
They're
crime.
allowing abortions in the 8th and 9th month. of
Well, Democrats
pregnancy.
have denied.
I think they're right. And I
That's the
think the
thing.
Republican Party is actually much less. I think I've made them much less radical, perhaps. But the Republican Party, what we're doing is bringing it back to the states where everybody wanted it. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservative, everybody wanted abortion brought back. They didn't want Roe v. Wade in the federal government. They wanted it. Everybody
But the
wanted
majority
it
of
back.
Americans oppose
Excuse
Roe
me.
v. Wade being
They
overturned.
don't
Multiple
know
polls have showed
about
that,
this.
sir.
Right now, they're voting. It brought it back to the states. Now, I happen to believe in the 3 exceptions. Ronald Reagan believed with rape, incest, life of the mother. I do. I think most people do. I think most Republicans do also. But if you take a look, right now they're doing, it's an amazing thing. Out of the federal government, it's in states, and people are voting. And I will say, Ohio is, let's call it a more liberal version, has been approved. Kansas, the same thing, a little bit surprising to a lot of people. But the people are now voting. And it's taking this issue that's been going on for 52 years and has torn our country apart, and it's giving it to the people to vote on. And they're voting. And many states have already voted. Others are in the process of voting. And it's bringing it back to the people and a vote of the people. And it's not at all radical. And again, you have to follow your heart. I happen to believe in the 3 exceptions. Most people believe in the 3 exceptions. Most Republicans believe in the exception. But they don't want
Interesting. I'm Al McFarlane. McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm with my colleague and friend Antonio Rossell. We're monitoring the presentation of former President Donald Trump. He's talking to the assembly of the Convention of National Association of Black Journalists. It's their annual convention going on right now in Chicago. We'll drop back in that conversation as well. It's a great that technology allows us to monitor this and talk about it at the same time. Antonio, prior to the show, I found our producer, Cooper, found an article in Newsweek, updated today, actually published early this morning and updated around 8 or so this morning. But the title is "Democrats Calling Republicans Weird is Extremely Clever." That was the comment of a professor who was described in this article. Let me share a few paragraphs from that. The article says, in the past week, the Democratic Party has launched a new attack on Republicans, characterizing them as, quote, creepy and, quote, weird, which an academic has described as an extremely clever communications strategy. Dr. Brian L. Ott, OTT, a professor of communications at Missouri State University, specializing in political messaging, said the tactic appeals to younger voters without alienating older ones and indirectly points to Trump's age, which might otherwise be off-putting to some voters. Quote, it subtly evokes discomfort and anxiety without calling him a threat to democracy, Ott told Newsweek. He further explained that it has the added advantage of being relatively tame as political insults go, in contrast with Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's often heated and degrading rhetoric. Trump is well known for using such rhetoric, including giving insulting nicknames to his political opponents. Throughout his political career, he has publicly called people fat or ugly or dumb as a rock. the last of which he's also used to describe President or his candidate, opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, Ott pointed out the term weird lends itself well to memes, which are often more effective or emotive than rational, and that the weird attack makes voters feel like Trump is out of touch. And I think the local angle is that question of Trump being called weird and J.D. Vance being called weird maybe started with our governor, Tim Walz, in an interview describing Trump as weird, and that's kind of elevated Tim Walz's standing as a potential VP candidate, and he was taken to task on a national news program about what did he mean? Was he calling all Republicans weird? And he said, no, I'm not. I'm just calling Trump weird. That the ordinary people that make up Trump's audience, many of them are just like me. They're my cousins or my neighbors, people I grew up with. And these are people that have anxiety. And what the leadership in the Republican Party is doing is stoking that anxiety. It's what you described when we opened the show, Antonio. The time now is a time that is showing a propensity, a race towards division and having people unable to talk to each other in a way that is healing or connective or seeking common ground for advancement. What do you think about that, number one, but also what we just heard, the president's comments in response to questions about J.D. Vance and the abortion issue in particular?
Al, thank you. That's a lot
Yes.
to unpack as well. So I may not be the typical voter, but I find the use of labels to try to paint another group of people through a stereotype to be kind of childish and in a way insulting to our intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that it's productive. I am not a political strategist. I don't run any campaigns, and I'm not a marketer and all of that. But if one of the things that we are trying to do is to build understanding, and we're trying to build bridges with people who consider themselves Republicans, I think that belittling them might not be the best approach. And yes, calling them weird might be better than calling them a threat to democracy. But I wish that we didn't have to do any of that. I wish that wouldn't be the tack that we choose. I wish that the people who form campaigns and who develop messages, and these are not just one or two people, they're giant corporations and companies that specialize in social marketing and all of these other things, and they test out hundreds of different messages. And I wish that they wouldn't push us toward kind of the lowest common denominator of stupidity.
Well, so I also have pulled up an article from the New Republic. It was published just after the one we read earlier that was put out at around 8 this morning. This one says that Trump is flailing as he tries to respond to Kamala calling him, quote unquote, weird. And it says that in a Fox News interview on Tuesday, yesterday, Trump tried to respond to the criticisms coming from Democrats and Vice President Kamala Harris that he and the GOP are, quote unquote, weird. It says he didn't succeed, instead responding by simply calling Harris weird back. That's what you're talking about. We've sort of descended to the lowest common denominator. Trump said the whole thing is a con job, just plain weird. You know who's plain weird? She's plain weird. She's a weird person. Look at her past. Look at what she does. Look at what she's used to say about herself. Trump said in the long, meandering interview with Laura Ingraham. I won't get into it, what she used to say and who she was compared to, starting about 2016, Trump added. So the dirt, right? And he was referring to that when Harris ran for the Senate in California in 2016, that what she used to say is unclear, but he perhaps was referring to her past as a district attorney and a California attorney general prior to them, while she was making a racist attack he made a racist attack on her record on crime. It goes on, he calling Jezebel attacks on her from other Republicans who were trying to use her previous relationships against her. So yeah, going to the lowest denominator, and both of them calling each other weird. Is there any value in that? Is the question.
Well, I don't think so, and I think it's bad for our democracy if that's the level of conversation that we have, the level of detail, and I think, unfortunately or fortunately, I guess, what works is what gets used, right? But we don't notice that it degrades the common space. And so, if we are having adults who aspire to the most powerful institution, the most powerful seat in the whole world, which is the presidency of the United States, and the movement of parties and the engagement of people around that by resorting to sixth grade or fourth grade insults, I think that doesn't bode well for us, and it also doesn't indicate that we take our responsibility, our individual responsibility as citizens of this country, that we don't take it seriously. I mean, if that's the quality of, they're weird, that's it. It's like, let's talk about the policies, let's talk about them in detail, and let's say, well, actually, your actions, President Trump, your actions when you supported Juan Guaido, to have an alternate president for Venezuela, and you imposed those sanctions in Venezuela and destroyed their economy. And now here we have those same Venezuelans looking for a place to live, transiting on foot many times, thousands of miles to come to the United States through the southern border, which is not, it's not an easy thing to do. And yet, that's, let's talk about that, and then we can also say, well, I understand that we need to have be a sanctuary to people from other places who are fleeing persecution or who are fleeing hunger, but let's do that in an organized way so that we can know who is coming in, we can know what they need, we can know how to support them, and we can be strategic about how it is that we distribute population and population centers so that there are resources for them. One of the saddest things that I have seen recently, and there are many, but one of them, I came to Minnesota in 1994. Mm-hmm. And over the last 5-8 years, I've now become accustomed to, in every single intersection, to and from a freeway, to see people begging for money, mm-hmm. which was unusual. I never saw that when I first came to Minnesota. One of the saddest things, I've seen families now do that. I've seen families with clothing that tells me they are, and in their signs, I'm from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. I'm from Iraq, and mm-hmm. with their kids. And so, what are we doing exactly? And I would like to say also just one other thing that I think is really important. As we're talking about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party calling each other weird, I want to bring it back to something actually that I heard in one of the shows that I was a guest in probably a couple of months ago. As we think about war and peace and so on. It was a show where you had Charles Caldwell on, and you also had Walter Griffin on.
The artist.
Talking,
Yeah.
Yeah, the artist. It was a
Mhm.
wonderful, wonderful show. And one of the things, a wonderful question that you asked was, how did you get your start? When did you feel that you had, the spirit of art within you, which we all do too. We
Mhm.
all have art inside us. How did you discover your spirit of art and bring it out? Charles Caldwell said, I was in 6th grade when I had an art class in my school that I had an awakening as an artist.
Mm.
And I think today, how many schools are now cutting arts classes? City of St. Paul, City of Minneapolis Public Schools, St. Paul Public Schools, $150 million deficits because their budgets are getting cut back, but we have endless money for war elsewhere in the world. I want to also mention, because that was such a wonderful show, Walter Griffin, photographer, beautiful art everywhere.
Mhm. Mhm.
When was your artist awakening? I was taking a third grade photography class when cameras, and he is not a young man today.
Mhm.
Many years ago, in 3rd grade, cameras were not cheap and ubiquitous like they are now. They were instruments of technology, and they were expensive, and they were hard to get. He had a photography class in 3rd grade where he had access to a good camera, and he had access to development. That's one of the things he talked about. He developed photos, and he saw this thing that I saw, it came alive in front of my eyes. And 3rd grade, how many kids today in our school system have access to that level of art, to the level of discovery? Why do we have $150 million deficit in the St. Paul public schools and in the Minneapolis public schools while we're sending billions and billions of dollars, $65 billion signed by our congressional representatives to make war and kill people in Ukraine, $26 billion by our congressional representatives, unanimously almost, except, say, for Ilhan Omar, to make war and continue to commit genocidal actions with our resources. And what are we doing with that? How come that's not an issue that gets discussed when Democrats and Republicans are vying for our vote? How come that doesn't get mentioned? Because they have us talking about stupid things like, he's weird, the Democrats are weird, the Republicans are weird. This intentional planting of stupidity is what keeps us where we are, and we should not take part in that.
Let's check out Kamala Harris. She's in Atlanta. This might be live, it might not be, but our producer says, the stream with Donald Trump ended. I'm presuming it ended after about 40 minutes or so. Seems like a short. I don't know whether he walked off in a conflict or if that was the end of the program. We'll find that out. And this with Kamala Harris may be something that's already pre-recorded. Let's listen for a second.
Fraudsters who ripped off consumers. Cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. I know the type. And I have been dealing with people like him my entire career. For example, as Attorney General of California, I took on one of our country's largest for-profit colleges that was scamming students. Well, Donald Trump ran a for-profit college that scammed students. As a prosecutor, I specialized in child sexual abuse cases and sexual abuse cases. Well, Trump was found liable for committing sexual abuse. And as an attorney general, I held the big Wall Street banks accountable for fraud. Donald Trump, I'm guilty of fraud. 34 counts.
Let's stop there.
So in this
So,
campaign,
Antonio, what do you think? I mean, this is a way of personalizing the campaign and drawing the contrast, and I think it's necessary. I think that the attack from the Republican Party is loaded and uh, embodies this capacity of our country to lie, but in a bold-faced way. Not to say that the Democrats have not lied and don't lie as well, they do. And we hear often in our communities that some people want to sit out because they feel they're not being served by either of the parties. It's a question of one set of rich and powerful people in contest with another set of rich and powerful, with us, the blades of grass, being trampled by these huge elephants on both sides. And so the question is, the pushback has to be from grassroots organizers. If we believe that the idea of democracy is real and that we can make a difference, and even though there are powerful moneyed interests that appear to be in control, that in itself is an appearance and not an absolute. And the absolute has to be when each of us decides that our voices matter and that we can organize and that we can share and that we can create a different consensus, a different understanding, a different analysis. We can actually assemble the world and reality differently by what we do, what we say, what we believe, where we go, and with whom we do things. And that's why I say an expanded vision of what an economy is, not just the Exxon directed economy, not just the tech directed economy or the central bank directed economy, but the more we can create opportunities for ordinary people to connect using technology and to be in relationships with each other, that changes the whole ball of wax, and it creates possibilities for more wealth generation. And wealth generation doesn't always have to mean massive wealth for a few at the expense of everybody. A redefining of the concept of wealth generation can mean something like systems of sharing, of knowing, of innovation, of caring that ensure the reduction of misery, the elimination of lack, and the propagation of opportunity for the third graders all over the planet, right? Unleashing their vision, their ability to become and to be and to do, and to have the confidence to know that the entire world is their neighborhood. I've said this in the past when I was a kid, Antonio. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. My parents would say, Al, you can go to, the alley, that's a half a block, and then our street, Brooklyn, from 28th to 29th, and we were on Brooklyn. The next block over is Park, where there's an alley behind our house. You can't cross the alley, but you can stay on this side. So that's square. So at 5 years old, my neighborhood, my block was my world. I'm 78 now, and Antonio, I want to say that at this age, I believe that the whole world is my neighborhood, and everybody on the planet is my neighbor. And I have an obligation to see them as I see myself, and to hope for them what I hope for me. And my mission has to be to figure out ways to get through the structures, the systems, and the processes that keep us apart, to break through the dialogue that you just criticized, that has us not talking to each other, but barking at each other, but to find a way that we can actually genuinely speak to each other, to engage each other, and create products, relationships, activities, transactions that represent a different kind of fairness, a broader, accessible fairness that does not represent an intent to extract and or exploit for personal power over somebody else. That's what I think. I don't know.
Al, that's beautiful. And that's what I want and think too. And, I think that's what most of the people in the world want and think as well. You know, I feel that as good thinking people, all of us want to work toward these things, but at the same time, there are structures that need us to participate in their vision of the world, and they steer us into their structure and their dysfunction by the stories and the narratives they implant in our heads through our passive participation in their culture. And I think that is the battle space for the 21st century. It's what we think and how we think about it, and how we exercise our sovereignty of mind and spirit, and that we can't ever lose sight of that. So anyway, I know that we probably have been
we got to
talking
wrap it up. We got to wrap it up.
Al,
Antonio, thank you, my friend.
Thank
We'll
you
see
very
next
much, Al.
time.
Thank you to our audience.
Okay,
Thank
take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.